Hello, I'm Byron Braithwaite, a 2023 Nuffield Scholar sponsored by the John Oldacre Foundation. I'm here to talk to you about my study, Creating Forests that Thrive in a Changing Climate, Drought and Fire Resilience.
Our forests provide us with so much beauty, but also ecosystem services such as carbon capture, water purification, and biodiversity. They provide us with social opportunities as well as improve our mental health. They provide us with a timber resource which is not only renewable, but provides us material for our homes, for energy, and for paper.
So why specifically drought and fire resilience? Well, we know that in the UK here, we will experience climate change as much of the world will. We should expect additional drought conditions to appear in our summers, as well as prolonged heat waves that could increase the risk of wildfire. So why focus on drought and fire resilience now? Well, the trees we plant today will be subject to these risks in the future. Our government's targets to plant thousands of new hectares of new woodland every year, as well as restructuring our existing forest, means that we should be planning for these eventualities now. The policy is in place, but my feeling as a practitioner was that these theories and practices aren't trickling down to the planning stages of forestry on the ground in the UK. My aim was to visit countries including Canada, France, Spain and New Zealand who are currently experiencing these conditions, to learn from them, to understand their forestry practices and how we can become more resilient in the face of these likely eventualities. So starting with the first topic, drought.
In British Columbia, I visited the Kalamalka Research Centre, where I determined through their research that aspect, soil moisture regime, and species can affect drought tolerance for a number of different reasons.
Through data models collected in British Columbia and New Zealand, they could determine what genotypes were specifically suited to site conditions that they had measured previously. But across all my travels, there was also this perception that getting back to basics with plant handling, planting technique, how we store and transport our trees, and what species we are breeding was incredibly important to consider. This is drummed into us as foresters, but it's often easy to forget as you're rushing to plant more trees or get on with other work.
Cell-grown stock was also becoming more and more popular with foresters and nurserymen alike, for the flexibility it offers to foresters for an extended growing season, but also for automation in nurseries to grow more trees more efficiently with limited labour resources available. Additives such as mycorrhizal fungi, fertilizers and hydrogels also increase the drought resilience of trees grown in this manner.
Wildfire is a natural disaster, but it seems to be the only one that we try to control. We acknowledge that we cannot control earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes, but we can prepare for them. To be prepared, we must ensure that we train our forestry staff, but also our farmers should consider how prepared they are. Carrying equipment during high fire risk, as well as considering what type of work they undertake. It was evident, particularly in New Zealand, that we should be putting our staff in front of active fire. Training someone in a non-fire environment will not prepare them to fight a fire. It's worth mentioning at this point that almost all wildfires across the world are caused by human activity. Cultural change is ultimately needed. If we focus on the young, this cultural change is likely to last into the next generation. So how should we create this public awareness? Well, of course, there are media campaigns we can consider, such as on social media. But I also observed on the New Zealand Met Weather app, their fire weather section. I thought this was a fantastic idea to promote easy awareness of the fire risk for that day. Signage was observed across these countries to make people aware where fire is a risk. These are often located in the most high-use areas. Our forests are also for working in, so what can we do to minimise the risk of wildfire as we work? I observed first of all, particularly in France, that work stops if the fire risk is high. Work also stopped earlier in the day during periods of medium risk. This meant getting up a little bit earlier to start work, but also an earlier finish to avoid the riskiest time of the day after lunch. Cleaning machines, most importantly engine bays and exhausts, particularly in the forest when harvesting, was important to prevent fuel igniting whilst the engine is hot. Having mitigation measures on site was an important part of the operational work in New Zealand. I observed water tanks on site even in the springtime to make sure that in the event of a fire there was water present to control it. Vegetation control is also a fantastic tool we can use to minimize or control the spread of fire. I observed a number of different measures to do this, including mechanical control with tractors, excavators and flails, but also the use of sheep and goats with shepherds to control vegetation, including woody vegetation, after a flail had been through. In France and Spain, I was surprised to find that there is legislation in place to enforce vegetation control around your home if you live near a forest. Fire breaks are important to create, but I want to dispel the myth now that creating a 10, 20, 30 meter fire break between your crops will be sufficient. It will not. Wildfires, particularly crown fires, will race through these with no effort at all. There is a suggestion that we should think more carefully about how wide our strips are and at least control the vegetation that develops in them. Particularly in New Zealand, I observed the need to react incredibly quickly to forest fire. If you can control the spread at an early stage, it becomes easier to manage. I was impressed by the fire appliances owned and managed by forest management companies, used either in collaboration or individually. And when it comes to it, make sure that all your equipment is standardized. Everyone having a different type of pump, hose or connection will not work in an emergency. It also provides the opportunity to make sure that everyone who is trained on the same type of equipment. Fire ponds are also a fantastic asset to have in your forest. A helicopter or fire appliance can use these to refill quickly and efficiently. Please make sure that the infrastructure into this pond is well maintained and suitable for heavy vehicles. Clearly there's a cost to all of this management, control and mitigation. So how should we fund this? My first point would be to observe the cost-benefit analysis. What is the cost of the carbon emissions or biodiversity loss that we encounter during wildfire? And how does this compare to the mitigating costs? Secondly, how can these costs be shared out? Is it fair for certain countries to stomach the majority of the cost if they're prone to wildfire? There is an argument to suggest that carbon is a problem for the whole world. Should the EU collectively fund fire management or mitigation in countries that are prone to fire now? How easy would this be politically to obtain? But we must also consider the societal cost. How does fire impact our tourism, our local businesses, or our lives?
Finally, thank you so much to all those shown here in these pictures that have assisted me on this journey, as well as to Nuffield and my sponsor, the John Ordaker Foundation.